The desert wind howled like a wild animal that night in 1987. Jake was alone at the radar station, watching those green dots move across the screen like he had done 1,000 times before. But this night was different. This night would change everything. Jake was 28 years old and had been working communications for the military for 6 years. He was good at his job. Maybe too good. That's why they sent him to this lonely place in the middle of nowhere. The base was so secret that even his own family didn't know where he worked. All they knew was that he was somewhere in the desert, keeping America safe. The storm that night was the worst he had ever seen. Lightning danced across the sky like angry fingers, and the thunder shook the small building where Jake sat watching his equipment. Then something strange happened on his radar screen. A dot appeared that wasn't supposed to be there. It was moving too fast and in the wrong direction. What the heck is that? Jake said to himself, leaning closer to the screen. The dot was getting bigger and moving toward the ground way too fast. Then it just disappeared. Jake grabbed his radio to call his boss, but all he got was static. The storm had knocked out most of their communications. He was completely alone, and something had just crashed somewhere out there in the desert. His training told him to stay put and wait for backup. But Jake had always been curious, maybe too curious for his own good. He grabbed his flashlight, put on his jacket, and stepped out into the storm. The wind almost knocked him over, and the rain felt like tiny rocks hitting his face. Following the direction where he saw the dot disappear, Jake walked for about 20 minutes through the desert. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and then he saw it. There was a strange glow coming from behind a large rock formation. When he got closer, Jake's mouth fell open. There was some kind of craft stuck between the rocks, but it didn't look like any airplane or helicopter he had ever seen. It was smooth and silver, about the size of a small house, and it was glowing with a soft blue light. This can't be real, Jake whispered to himself. But it was real, and it was right there in front of him. As he got closer, he noticed that part of the craft was damaged. There was a hole in the side, and he could see sparks flying inside. That's when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was like someone moaning in pain, but not quite human. Jake knew he should run back to base and report this, but something stopped him. Someone was hurt in there, and he couldn't just leave him. He had been trained as a field medic, and his conscience wouldn't let him walk away from someone who needed help. Carefully, Jake climbed through the hole in the craft. Inside, everything was strange and beautiful. The walls seemed to glow with their own light, and there were symbols and patterns he had never seen before. But what caught his attention was the figure lying on the floor near some kind of control panel. At first, Jake thought it was a person wearing some kind of advanced armor. But as he got closer with his flashlight, he realized this wasn't human at all. The being was tall, probably 7 feet, with skin that looked silver blue in the strange light. She was definitely female. Jake could tell that much, but unlike any woman he had ever seen, her armor looked like it was part of her body, with strange patterns that seemed to move and change as he watched. Her face was beautiful but alien, with high cheekbones and eyes that glowed like golden amber. She was breathing, but barely, and there was some kind of green liquid coming from a wound on her arm. "Hey," Jake said softly, not wanting to scare her. "Can you hear me? I want to help." The alien woman's eyes suddenly opened and focused on him. For a moment, Jake thought she might attack him. Her hand moved toward what looked like a weapon on her belt. But then she saw his hands raised peacefully, and she relaxed slightly. She tried to say something, but the words sounded like music mixed with whispers. Jake couldn't understand a single word, but the tone was clear. She was in pain and confused. "It's okay," Jake said, moving slowly toward her. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a medic. Well, sort of. I can help with that wound." Jake pulled out his first aid kit and showed it to her. The alien woman watched carefully as he opened it and took out bandages and antiseptic. She seemed to understand that he wanted to help because she moved her injured arm toward him. Working by the light of his flashlight and the strange glow from the ship, Jake cleaned and bandaged her wound as best he could. The green liquid stopped flowing, and she seemed to feel better. She said something in her musical language that sounded like thank you. For the next 3 days, Jake came back to the crashed ship whenever he could get away from his duties. The alien woman, who pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Kira, was getting stronger. Her ship was slowly repairing itself with technology that Jake couldn't begin to understand. During those 3 days, something amazing happened. Kira began to learn English at an incredible speed, and Jake picked up a few words of her language. They started to communicate, and Jake learned that she was a warrior from far away, chasing some kind of enemy that had been watching Earth. Bad ones. She said in broken English on the second day, "They watch your people. Plan hurt." Jake helped her track these enemies using his knowledge of the local area and his military training. Together, they found 3 of these hostile beings hiding in caves nearby. Jake had never seen anything so terrifying. They looked like shadows with teeth, and they moved in ways that hurt his eyes to watch. The fight was brief but intense. Kira moved like lightning, her strange weapons cutting through the darkness. Jake helped by using his tactical knowledge to predict where the enemies would go. When it was over, the hostile aliens were gone, and Jake felt like he had just lived through the most important moment of his life. On the 3rd night, Kira's ship was ready to fly again. Before she left, she did something that Jake would never forget. She took his hand and placed it on a strange device that glowed with warm light. The device left a mark on his arm that looked like a beautiful, intricate symbol. "I never forget you, human," she said, her English much better now. "Time of great need, I return." Promise. Jake watched as her ship rose silently into the stormy sky and disappeared among the stars. When he looked down at his arm, the mark was there, faint but real. He had proof that this incredible thing had really happened. Back at base, Jake tried to report what he had seen, but his superior officer just laughed and said the storm had made him see things. No one believed him, and eventually, Jake stopped trying to convince them, but he never stopped believing. And he never forgot Kira, the warrior woman from the stars who had trusted him enough to let him help save Earth from an enemy no one else even knew existed. Years would pass, and Jake would sometimes wonder if he had imagined it all. But the mark on his arm remained, fading but never completely disappearing, a reminder of a promise made under a stormy desert sky. The years after Kira's departure were the hardest of Jake's life. He left the military in 1989, 2 years after that incredible night in the desert. The official reason was that he wanted to start a civilian career, but the real reason was that nobody believed his story. His commanding officers thought the desert had gotten to him, and his fellow soldiers whispered behind his back. Jake tried to forget about it and move on with his life. He got a job working with computers, which was the new big thing back then. He was good at it too, really good. Within a few years, he had his own company helping businesses protect their computer systems from hackers and other threats. In 1992, Jake met Lisa at a coffee shop in Denver. She was a teacher, kind and smart, with a laugh that could light up any room. They fell in love, got married, and built a beautiful life together. Jake thought maybe he could finally put that strange night behind him and be normal. But the mark on his arm never let him forget completely. Most of the time, it was so faint you could barely see it. Lisa noticed it once during their honeymoon and asked about it. Jake told her it was from an old military accident, which wasn't exactly a lie. She never asked again. Jake and Lisa had 2 kids. Their daughter Amy was born in 1995, and she was curious about everything from the moment she could walk. She loved looking at the stars and asking questions about space that Jake couldn't always answer. Their son Mike came along in 1998, and he was more practical, always wanting to know how things worked rather than wondering about what might be out there. As the years went by, Jake found himself looking up at the night sky more often than he should. Lisa would catch him standing in their backyard at midnight, just staring at the stars. When she asked what he was thinking about, he would just say he was enjoying the peaceful night. But it wasn't peaceful for Jake. Every time there was news about strange lights in the sky or unexplained phenomena, his heart would race. Could this be it? Was Kira coming back? but the reports always turned out to be airplanes or weather balloons, or some other ordinary explanation. The mark on his arm would sometimes glow very faintly during big world events. Jake first noticed it on September 11, 2001, when he was watching the terrible news on television. The mark felt warm and pulsed with a soft light that only he could see. Lisa was too shocked by what was happening to notice that her husband was staring at his arm instead of the screen. It happened again during the big tsunami in 2004 that killed so many people in Asia. Jake was at work when the news broke, and suddenly his arm felt like it was on fire. He ran to the bathroom and rolled up his sleeve. The mark was glowing brighter than he had ever seen it, pulsing like a heartbeat. This is it, Jake thought. She's coming back now. But days passed, then weeks, then months. Nothing happened. The mark faded back to its usual barely visible state, and Jake felt foolish for getting his hopes up. Amy grew up to be brilliant, just like her mother, but with her father's curiosity about the unknown. She studied engineering in college and got a job with NASA after graduation. Sometimes Jake wanted to tell her about that night in the desert, but he was afraid she would think he was losing his mind. Mike became a lawyer, practical and logical. Just like he had been as a child, he worried about his father's strange habits, like the way Jake would suddenly stop talking and stare at empty space, as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. The worst time came in 2019 when Lisa got sick. It started as just feeling tired all the time, but the doctors found cancer. Jake spent every moment he could with her, holding her hand and telling her stories about their life together. But he never told her about Kira. Lisa passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in autumn. Jake held her hand as she took her last breath, and he felt like part of his soul had been torn away. At the funeral, the mark on his arm glowed so brightly that Jake had to keep his sleeves pulled down so no one would see it. After Lisa died, Jake became different. Amy and Mike both noticed it. Their father, who had always been a little distant and dreamy, became obsessed with researching strange phenomena online. He joined forums where people shared stories about alien encounters and unexplained experiences. Jake started writing down everything he remembered about that night with Kira. He filled notebook after notebook with details, trying to capture every word she had said, every strange thing he had seen in her ship. He drew pictures of her armor, her weapons, and the symbols he remembered seeing. Amy tried to be supportive. She would visit her father and listen to his stories, even though she wasn't sure if she believed them. As someone who worked in space research, she knew that the universe was vast and full of possibilities. Maybe her father really had experienced something extraordinary. Mike was less patient. He thought his father was having some kind of breakdown after losing his mother. He suggested therapy, maybe some medication to help with what he called grief. Hallucinations. This led to arguments between the brothers and made Jake feel even more alone. The years crawled by. Jake celebrated his 60th birthday in 2019, then his 61st, then his 62nd. Every year, he expected this to be the year Kira would return. Every major crisis in the world, wars, natural disasters, pandemics, made the mark on his arm pulse with that strange light. During the COVID pandemic in 2020, Jake was stuck in his house like everyone else. But instead of watching Netflix or learning to bake bread like his neighbors, he spent his time scanning the internet for any sign that his alien friend might be returning. The mark on his arm glowed almost constantly during those scary months, when nobody knew what was happening to the world. Jake retired from his computer business in 2022. He sold his house in Denver and moved to a small cabin in the mountains of Colorado. Amy thought it was a good idea for him to have a peaceful place to live out his golden years. Mike worried that their father was isolating himself too much, living alone in the mountains. Jake had more time than ever to think about that night. In 1987, he would sit on his porch in the evenings, looking up at the stars and wondering if Kira was still alive somewhere out there. Had she forgotten about him? Had she tried to come back but couldn't find him? Some nights, Jake felt like giving up hope entirely. Maybe he really had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the stress of military life and the isolation of that desert base had made him see things that weren't really there. Maybe his kids were right to worry about his mental health. But then he would look down at his arm. And even though the mark was barely visible, it was still there, real and permanent. Proof that something extraordinary had happened to him all those years ago. Jake never stopped believing that Kira would keep her promise. Even when his faith wavered, even when he felt foolish and alone, he held onto the memory of her voice saying those words, "Time of great need, I return, promise." He just hoped that when that time came, he would still be alive to see her again. Jake woke up on a cold morning in February 2024 to find his coffee maker flashing strange patterns. The display should have shown the time, but instead it was blinking in a sequence that made his heart race. 3 short flashes, 2 long ones, then 3 short again. It was a pattern he recognized from 37 years ago. At 65 years old, Jake had gotten used to living alone in his mountain cabin. His hair was completely gray now, and his back ached when he got out of bed, but his mind was still sharp. Maybe too sharp, according to his son Mike, who called every week to check on his father's mental health. The coffee maker stopped its strange blinking after a few minutes and went back to normal. Jake stared at it for a long time, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, he knew he hadn't. Something was starting to happen. Over the next few weeks, more electronic devices in Jake's cabin began acting strangely. His television would change channels by itself, always stopping on news programs about space or science. His radio picked up signals that sounded almost musical, like the language Kira had spoken all those years ago. His computer would randomly open websites about astronomy and unexplained phenomena. Jake's two dogs, Rex and Buddy, started behaving oddly too. These were tough mountain dogs who weren't afraid of bears or mountain lions. But suddenly they were acting scared of something Jake couldn't see. They would bark at empty corners of the cabin and refuse to go outside after dark. Rex, the older dog, would sometimes sit and stare at the ceiling for hours, whimpering softly. The mark on Jake's arm, which had been barely visible for years, began to glow more frequently. Not just during world crises now, but almost every day. Sometimes it would pulse in rhythmic patterns that reminded Jake of mathematics or music. He started writing down these patterns, trying to figure out if they meant something. Amy called him on a Tuesday evening in March, and Jake could hear the excitement in her voice even though she was trying to sound calm. "Dad, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise to keep it secret," she said. "We're detecting some unusual objects in the outer solar system. Big ones. They're not asteroids or comets." Jake's hand went automatically to his arm, where the mark was glowing so brightly he was glad Amy couldn't see him through the phone. "What kind of objects?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We don't know yet. They're too far away to get clear images, but they're moving in formation, like they're controlled by intelligence. NASA is keeping this quiet until we know more. But Dad, I keep thinking about those stories you used to tell me." After Amy hung up, Jake sat in his favorite chair and stared out at the night sky for the first time in decades. He felt real hope mixing with real fear. If these objects were what he thought they were, then Kira's promise about returning during humanity's time of great need was about to come true. But what if these weren't Kira's people? What if they were the enemies she had been chasing all those years ago? The next few weeks passed in a blur of strange events. Jake's mark glowed brighter and brighter, sometimes so bright that he had to wear long sleeves. Even inside his own house, the patterns it made were becoming more complex, like some kind of countdown or communication signal. Global news started reporting unusual activity around the world. Pilots were seeing strange lights that moved in impossible ways. Satellite systems were experiencing mysterious interference. Ocean temperatures were changing in patterns that made no scientific sense. Jake knew that most people would dismiss these reports as coincidence or natural phenomena. But he also knew that governments and space agencies around the world were probably panicking behind closed doors. Humanity was about to face something it wasn't prepared for. One night in late April, Jake was awakened by his dogs going absolutely crazy. They were barking and howling like he had never heard before, running back and forth between the windows as if something was circling the cabin. Jake got out of bed and looked outside, but he couldn't see anything unusual. The forest around his cabin looked peaceful under the moonlight, but the dogs wouldn't calm down, and the mark on his arm was burning like fire. Then the power went out. Jake grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto his porch. The silence that greeted him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. No wind in the trees, no insects chirping, no sound at all. Even his dogs had stopped barking and were now pressed against his legs, trembling. The silence stretched on for several minutes. Jake found himself holding his breath, waiting for something to happen. The mark on his arm was now glowing so brightly that it was casting shadows through his shirt. Sleeve. Then he saw her dot at first. It was just a shape moving between the trees, too tall and too graceful to be human. Jake's heart started pounding as the figure came closer. Stepping out of the forest and into the moonlight near his cabin, she was exactly as he remembered, but also completely different. Kira still stood 7 feet tall with that incredible silver blue skin that seemed to glow with its own light. But her armor was more advanced now, with new patterns and symbols that shifted and changed as Jake watched. Her face was more mature, marked by what looked like ritual scars that told stories of battles fought in distant worlds. Most striking of all were her eyes. They still glowed with that beautiful amber light, but they held a sadness and wisdom that hadn't been there 37 years ago. These were the eyes of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall, who had fought wars that most people couldn't even imagine. "Hello, Jake," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it, musical and strong. Her English was perfect now, with no trace of the broken words she had spoken during their first meeting. Jake's flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered onto the porch floor. He stood there staring at her, unable to speak. Part of him had always believed this moment would come, but now that it was actually happening, he felt overwhelmed. "You kept your promise," he finally managed to say. Kira stepped closer, and Jake could see that her expression was serious, almost grave. "I told you I would return in your time of great need," she said. "That time has come, my friend. The enemies I was hunting 37 years ago have returned, and they bring with them an army that could destroy your entire world." Jake looked up at the night sky, where he could now see faint lights moving among the stars. They were too far away for most people to notice, but they were there, getting closer every day. "The objects your daughter detected," Kira continued, reading his thoughts. "They carry millions of beings who have been preparing Earth for harvest. They have been influencing your world for decades, creating chaos and division to weaken your species before the final attack." "What do you need me to do?" Jake asked, and as soon as the words left his mouth, he felt like that young soldier again, ready to help his alien friend save the world. Kira smiled, and for a moment she looked like the warrior he had first met in that crashed ship so long ago. "I need you to help me save both our worlds," she said. "But first, we must convince your people that the threat is real, and we must do it quickly, because they will be here soon." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. The long wait was finally over, and the real adventure was just beginning. Jake stared at Kira standing in his moonlit yard, and for a moment he felt like he was dreaming. But the cold mountain air on his face and the sound of his dogs whimpering behind him told him this was very real. After 37 years of waiting, his alien friend had finally returned. "You look older," Kira said with a gentle smile, stepping closer to the porch. "But your spirit is the same. I can sense it." Jake laughed, running a hand through his gray hair. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when you wait almost for decades for someone. You've barely changed at all. Time moves differently for my people." During long space journeys, Kira explained, "For me, it has been perhaps 10 of your years since we last met, but I have spent those years fighting a war across multiple star systems." As she spoke, Jake noticed the new scars on her arms and face. They weren't random marks, but deliberate patterns that seemed to tell a story. Her armor was more sophisticated too, with technology that made her original gear look primitive. "Tell me about these enemies," Jake said. You called them something. Before, the Void Seekers, Kira's voice grew cold. They are parasites that consume entire civilizations. They don't just destroy worlds, they drain the life force from every living thing and convert the survivors into their servants. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. And they're coming here. They have been preparing Earth for decades. Many of the conflicts your world has experienced, the environmental disasters, the growing hatred between different groups of humans, much of this has been influenced by their advanced scouts. Before Jake could respond, they heard the sound of a car coming up his mountain road. Jake looked at his watch and frowned. It was past midnight, and he lived miles from the nearest neighbor. That's probably Amy, Jake said. My daughter. She works for NASA and she's been tracking those objects you mentioned. Kira nodded. She has inherited your curiosity and your courage. I have been monitoring Earth's communications, and I know of her work. A few minutes later, Amy's car pulled into Jake's driveway. She got out quickly, clearly worried about her father. At 38, Amy had her mother's kind eyes but her father's stubborn determination. Dad, are you okay? She called out as she hurried toward the porch. Your phone went straight to voicemail, and then I saw your power was out from the road. Amy stopped walking when she noticed Jake wasn't alone. At first, she couldn't see Kira clearly in the shadows, but she could tell someone very tall was standing near the cabin. Dad, who's that? Amy asked, her voice cautious. Jake looked at Kira, who nodded and stepped into the light. Amy's mouth fell open as she saw the 7-foot-tall alien warrior with glowing skin and advanced armor. This is going to sound crazy, Jake said to his daughter, but this is Kira. She's the one I've been telling you about all these years. Amy stared at Kira for a long moment, her scientific mind trying to process what she was seeing. Then she sat down heavily on Jake's porch steps. This is really happening, Amy whispered. Dad, you were telling the truth all along. Kira approached Amy slowly, her hands visible and peaceful. Your father saved my life many years ago, and he helped me protect your world from a scouting party of Void Seekers. Now I need both of your help to save Earth from a much larger threat. Over the next hour, sitting around Jake's kitchen table by candlelight, Kira explained the situation. The objects Amy had been tracking were massive ships carrying millions of Void Seekers. They had been slowly approaching Earth's solar system while their advanced teams worked to weaken humanity from within. We estimate you have perhaps 2 weeks before they arrive in force, Kira said. My people, the Kethari, have been fighting them across the galaxy. We have ships positioned throughout your solar system, but we cannot win this battle alone. Amy, who had been taking notes on her phone, looked up. What do you need from us? Your father understands both human military tactics and Kethari technology. He will serve as a liaison between our forces and your world's governments. You, with your knowledge of Earth's satellite and communication systems, will help coordinate the defense. Jake felt a mix of pride and terror. At 65, he was being asked to help save the world. What about Mike, my son? He's going to think we've all lost our minds. We'll need him too, Kira said. As a lawyer, he has connections with government officials. Someone will need to convince your leaders that this threat is real, and it cannot be someone who appears on your radar as having no official credentials. The next morning, Mike arrived at the cabin after Amy called him. Jake's son was a practical man who had spent years worrying about his father's mental health. When he walked into the kitchen and saw Kira sitting at the table, he nearly fainted. This isn't real, Mike said, backing toward the door. This is some kind of elaborate hoax. Kira stood up slowly, her full height making the kitchen ceiling seem low. Your skepticism is understandable, Mike, but I can prove to you that this is real. She touched a device on her armor, and suddenly the cabin was filled with holographic images showing the approaching Void Seeker fleet. The three-dimensional display showed hundreds of massive ships moving through space, each one large than Earth's biggest cities. These images are being transmitted from Kethari reconnaissance ships positioned near the edge of your solar system, Kira explained. Your Earth-based telescopes cannot see them yet because they are still too far away. and using stealth technology. Mike stared at the holograms, his lawyer's mind trying to find flaws in what he was seeing. But the evidence was right there in front of him, impossible to deny. How long do we have? Mike asked quietly. 12 days, Kira replied. Maybe less, Amy had been studying the holographic displays with her scientific training. These ships are enormous. How are we supposed to fight something like that? Not with weapons alone, Kira said. The Void Seekers are powerful, but they have weaknesses. They rely on technology that drains life energy, but that same technology can be turned against them. If we can coordinate Earth's electromagnetic field with Ketheri energy weapons. Jake leaned forward. What exactly are you asking us to do? I need you to help me contact your world's leaders and convince them to work with us. Then we need to set up a command center, where human and Ketheri forces can coordinate their efforts. The battle will be fought both in space and on Earth's surface. Mike was still staring at the holographic fleet. How do we convince world leaders to believe in aliens when I can barely believe it myself? With evidence they cannot ignore, Kira said. She touched her armor again, and the holograms changed to show Void Seeker infiltration sites around the world. These are locations where advanced scouts have been operating. Your government's intelligence agencies have been tracking unusual activity at these sites for years, but couldn't explain what they were seeing. Amy stood up, her face determined. I can use my NASA contacts to get us access to government officials, and I know people at other space agencies around the world. I can help with the legal and political side, Mike added, though he still looked shaken. But people are going to panic when they find out about this. Jake looked at his children and felt a surge of pride. His family was coming together to face the impossible, just like he had always hoped they would. Then we better get started. Jake said, We've got a world to save. Kira smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, she looked hopeful. With your family's help and the courage of your species, we might actually have a chance. Outside the cabin, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful, but Jake couldn't help wondering if it might be one of the last peaceful sunrises Earth would ever see. The next 10 days passed like a whirlwind. Jake found himself in the middle of the most secret military operation in human history. World leaders who had never believed in aliens were suddenly having emergency meetings with a 7-foot-tall warrior from another planet. The hardest part wasn't convincing people that aliens existed. Kira's presence made that impossible to deny. The hardest part was convincing them that humanity could actually win this fight. Jake stood in an underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by generals, scientists, and world leaders all talking at once on the massive screens around the room. Satellite images showed the approaching Void Seeker fleet getting closer to Earth every hour. They'll be here in less than 48 hours, Amy announced from her station, where she was tracking the enemy ships with equipment that combined human technology with Ketheri science. The lead ships are already entering our outer atmosphere. Mike was on another screen, video calling from Washington, D.C., where he had been working around the clock to coordinate legal agreements between different countries. The United Nations has agreed to the Joint Defense Plan, but some nations are still hesitant about sharing military resources with alien allies. Kira stood at the center of the command room, her armor glowing with information from Ketheri ships positioned throughout the solar system. My people are ready to begin the orbital defense, but we need human ground forces to protect the energy relay stations. Jake looked around the room at all these important people. Depending on an old man who used to fix radios in the desert, it felt impossible. But here he was, translating between two species that were about to fight for the survival of both their worlds. What's our biggest problem? Jake asked Kira. The Void Seekers have learned from their previous encounters with US, she replied. They know our tactics, but they don't understand human creativity and adaptability. That's our advantage. The first attacks came at dawn on a Tuesday. Jake watched from the command center as streaks of light filled the sky above major cities around the world. But these weren't Void Seeker weapons. They were Ketheri defense ships engaging the enemy in Earth's upper atmosphere. It's starting, Amy said quietly. her hands flying over her control panels as she coordinated satellite defenses. Jake put on his communication headset and began his most important job yet, serving as the voice between human and alien forces. Kethri Command, this is Earth Base. What's your status? Kira's voice came through clearly, speaking in her own language from somewhere high above the planet. Jake translated her words for the human commanders. First wave of enemy scouts has been eliminated, but the main fleet is still approaching. They're trying to establish landing zones in remote areas for 3 days. The battle raged in ways that most people on Earth never saw. News reports showed strange lights in the sky and emergency broadcasts telling people to stay indoors. But they didn't show the incredible space battles happening just outside the atmosphere. Jake barely slept during those 3 days. He stood at his station, translating orders and coordinates between human military forces and Kethri warriors. His son Mike worked with governments to evacuate cities that might be targeted. His daughter Amy used her NASA training to coordinate a network of satellites that had been converted into weapons. On the 4th day, everything changed. The main Void Seeker fleet finally reached Earth, and their ships were even larger than the holograms had shown. Each ship was like a floating city, dark and twisted, with energy weapons that could level mountains. They're targeting the major population centers. Amy reported, her voice tight with fear. New York, London, Tokyo. They want to harvest as many people as possible. Jake watched the tactical displays and felt his heart sink. The Kethri were outnumbered 3-1, and human weapons seemed almost useless against the enemy's advanced shields. We're losing, one of the generals said grimly. Maybe we should consider surrender terms. No, Jake said firmly, surprising everyone in the room. Kira told me these things don't take prisoners. They turn people into slaves or they drain their life energy completely. Surrender isn't an option. That's when Jake had an idea that would have seemed crazy a week ago, but now felt like their only hope. What if we use Earth itself as a weapon? He asked Amy. You know how the planet has a magnetic field that protects us from solar radiation. What if we could amplify that field and turn it into some kind of shield or weapon? Amy's eyes widened as she understood what her father was suggesting. The magnetic field is generated by the planet's core. If we could coordinate all of Earth's power grids with Kethri energy technology, it might create an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disable their ships. Kira's voice came through Jake's headset. She had been listening to their conversation from her command ship, but it would require perfect timing and coordination between every power plant on your planet. The plan was incredibly risky. If it failed, Earth's entire electrical grid would be destroyed, leaving humanity defenseless. But if it worked, it might be enough to turn the tide of the battle. Jake found himself coordinating the most complex operation in human history. Power plant operators in dozens of countries had to synchronize their output to the exact second. Kethri energy ships had to position themselves at precise locations around the planet, and it all had to happen while Void Seeker forces were attacking cities around the world. 30 seconds to activation. Amy announced, all stations report ready. Jake looked around the command center at all the people who had believed in him, and his crazy story about an alien friend, his children, who had spent years worrying about his mental health, were now trusting him to help save the world. 10 seconds. Amy called out, 5 for 3, 2, 1, activate. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then every screen in the command center went white as an incredible pulse of energy erupted from the planet's magnetic field. The pulse spread outward like a wave, amplified by Kethri technology into something that had never existed before. When the screens cleared, the Void Seeker ships were floating dead in space, their dark hulls no longer glowing with stolen life. Energy. The electromagnetic pulse had fried their systems and freed millions of enslaved beings they had been carrying. It worked. Mike's voice came through from Washington, filled with disbelief. The ships are powerless. Our people are reporting that the creatures inside seem to be dissolving. Jake slumped in his chair, exhausted but amazed. They had actually done it. Humanity and the Kethri had worked together to defeat an enemy that had destroyed countless other worlds, Later that evening, Jake stood outside the command center, looking up at the night sky where Ketheri's ships were helping to clear away the disabled Void Seeker vessels. Kira materialized beside him, her armor no longer glowing with battle readiness. "We did it," Jake said simply. "You did it." Kira corrected him. "Your idea saved both our worlds." The Void Seekers relied on technology, stolen from other species, but they had never encountered anything like Earth's magnetic field used as a weapon. Jake smiled, feeling older than his 65 years, but more satisfied than he had ever been in his life. "So what happens now? Now my people will establish a permanent presence on Earth," Kira said, "not as conquerors, but as friends and allies. The universe is vast and full of dangers, but together our species can face whatever comes next." Amy and Mike joined them outside, both looking exhausted but proud. For the first time in years, Jake's family was completely together, and they had just helped save the world. "I have something for you," Kira said to Jake. She touched a device on her armor, and the mark on Jake's arm began to glow brighter than it ever had before. But now the glow was warm and peaceful instead of urgent. "This mark will now serve as a symbol of the alliance between our peoples," she explained, "and as a reminder that sometimes the most important promises are the ones that take a lifetime to keep." Jake looked at the glowing symbol on his arm, then up at his alien friend who had kept her word after 37 years. "I never forgot you, human," Kira said, repeating the words she had spoken in that crashed ship so long ago, "and I never will." As they stood together under the stars, Jake realized that his long wait had been worth every moment of doubt and loneliness. Sometimes the most incredible friendships are the ones that span not just years, but entire worlds.